This is a short video on something called block chords on piano. And to understand block chords, let's just go back to looking at the 12-bar blues form, which can be real simple and with no rhythmic or chordal adornment, just kind of sounds like this. I'm not going to even play the whole form. You get the idea. It's a long time to be kind of hammering away on that chord. And so one of the challenges for musicians in different styles is how do you create a sense of movement and a sense of dynamism when there's not much happening in terms of new chords, when we're basically just camped out on one chord. And whether it's classical music or jazz music, there are all sorts of things that musicians in different styles have done historically. And one of those solutions is going to be key to the block chords. And that has to do with playing a chord and then playing another chord that sets up the original chord really well as an arrival point. So if you see my video on 5/1s, you'll know that that's what 5/1s do. The 5 chord gives this 1 chord a real sense of arrival. So if you want this chord to sound like you're in the right spot, you precede it with a 5. Of course, if you start on that chord, it's a very simple idea. 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. That might be something that you would recognize in classical music. We're going to take a similar idea, but we're not going to use a 5 chord. We're going to use a close relative, which is something called a diminished chord, which I'm going to form by taking this note and moving it 1 key up. And now the diminished chord has a different sound, but it also leads really nicely to the 1 chord because it has so-called smooth voice leading. That just means that the key notes in this chord are not too far away from the key notes in this chord. So here's my diminished chord. Sorry. This one feels different than the 5/1, but still like we've arrived. We're back home when we put the diminished chord in front of the 1 chord. Now we're almost to the point where we can explain how block chords are sometimes used. We just need to talk about something called inversions. Here's my diminished chord. It's got 4 notes, and an inversion just means which of these 4 notes goes on the bottom. And you can put any of the 4 notes on the bottom. So here's this note on the bottom. Now I'm going to put the second note on the bottom and put the first note on the top. Then the third note on the bottom, second note on the top, fourth note on the bottom. So here are my different inversions of the diminished chord. They sound different, like we're moving somewhere, but it's all really the same chord. I can set up a 1 chord to feel like home using any of these inversions. So here's the first one I played, the second one I played. That also feels like a good landing point. Here's the third one. That works too. Then I can do the last one. If we look at the 1 chord that I'm playing and I add a 4th note to it, I can play 4 inversions. Now, here's where the block chords get kind of neat in the way that they're sometimes used. If I take the 1 chord and play the diminished chord, I can go back to the original 1 chord. Or I could play a 1 chord, diminished chord, then go to my next inversion of the 1 chord. Right now, it feels like I'm moving somehow to 3 different chords and back. But really, it's just the same one chord, diminished chord, one chord in a new inversion, diminished chord, one chord. And I don't have to come back down. I can keep going up. One, diminished chord, one, diminished chord, one, diminished, one chord, diminished chord, one. This is just apparent motion. I'm not really changing chords. One diminished is basically the same as 1, 5, 1. And that's not that much different than just 1, 1, 1. But it feels like something's happening. It feels like we're playing some sort of melody, we're creating some sort of movement, even though behind the scenes, we're basically just staying on one chord. So we can fill the space in the 12-bar blues if we want by that sounds like I'm going all over the place, even though I'm only playing this very static harmony. These block chords were popularized by Milt Buckner, later used by George Shearing, Ahmad Jamal, Ray Garland, Bill Evans, and they're a big component of the sound of a lot of so-called cool jazz, sometimes called West Coast jazz. And it's called cool jazz because it really contrasts with the high intensity, sort of frantic sound of bebop. This isn't super fast melody notes played all over the piano. It's this very dense, lush sound of these blocks of sound put together. These block chords are sometimes called fixed hand chords because you can just sort of pick a spacing on your hand and when you're good at this, which I'm not, kind of just move it up and down all over the keyboard without changing the way your fingers are arranged too much. See, you can hear that sound of block chords in the video that I will also link below, and it's in all types of cool jazz and music beyond. That's the block chord.